should you study modeling or train in modeling? I'm going to answer the question, and at the end I'll give you three paths you can take. Three paths to the answer, if that makes sense. It will make sense. But before I get on to the answer of that question, I want to address a misconception. And that's because this misconception, or addressing it, will better explain the answer to the actual question. So to start with, the misconception, which is a misconception I found a lot of people have when they approach modeling. It's definitely a big misconception of people outside the industry. I'd probably even say it's probably safe to say it's a majority of people outside of the industry have this misconception about modeling. And I'll explain it in comparison to a similar misconception that a lot of people have about acting when they approach acting. I've studied with, I've trained with, and I've worked with a lot of actors who had misconceptions about what acting actually was, like what the job actually entailed, the techniques of it, and the study involved, how you actually act, the exercises involved, all this sort of thing. They had a lot of misconceptions about it, and it was a big shock. It was a big shock to a lot of people, and a lot of them quit. I found there is a very similar misconception when it comes to modeling. People approaching modeling, but then a lot of people outside of the industry. And specifically for modeling, the misconception is all you gotta do is stand there and look pretty. There is more to it than that, but that is the misconception. And anyone who has actually modeled, especially if you've modeled professionally, you know there is more to that. More to it than that. Don't get me wrong, that is part of it. But saying models just have to stand there and look pretty is like saying an actor just has to get on screen and pretend to be another person. It's like, okay, yeah, an extreme oversimplification and not easy to do. There is a lot of, for example, with the acting, there is a lot of technique behind acting and making it realistic. See, pretty much anyone, as long as you don't have like stage fright or anything, anyone can get up on stage or in front of a camera and like say words and try and pretend to be someone. But to make it realistic, to actually have a connection with your audience, that's a completely different story. It takes a lot of technique, and it takes practice, it takes training. And modeling is the same. Obviously the techniques are different, and there are differences in the techniques. There are some similar techniques though, between the two. When you do both, you realize there's some similar techniques. Obviously in this video I won't actually go into all the detail about the technique of modeling and that sort of thing, but I will quickly mention that when I say technique, there's a certain way you carry yourself, how you move, the expressions on your face. There is a certain amount of acting to it, which I can go into further in other videos, but basically to sum up that part, there is technique to it. There is an art to modeling. It's not as simple as standing there and smiling or not smiling, and someone just taking photos or video of you. There is a technique to it. So in saying that, that's what I mean by now it moves on to the actual, answering the actual question of this video, which I'll explain it this way. I'll quickly mention like I said, the 3 ways that you can kind of enter the industry from a training point of view or a study point of view. I'll give you an example of my experience, and then I'll kind of give you like the final answer. So first of all, the 3 ways you can approach it is, 1, you can jump straight in. Modeling, like many creative jobs, is one of those ones where you can just kind of jump in. You can learn as you go. You'll need to find some kind of starting point. You can't walk up to Gucci and say, hey, I want to be a model. They're not going to give you a job. At least not then and there. But you can approach it that way. You can start, just start working, either find smaller jobs or find collaborative projects and kind of get going, learn as you go. Work with more experienced people, that sort of thing. The next way is like the traditional education route, which is going to college or university, actually getting like qualifications and all that sort of thing, which I'll explain a bit more about in a second. But the third way is kind of the middle ground between the 2. It is just kind of getting started, but it's doing a bit more study and training yourself. So it's the alternative education route, which there are 2 ways you can go about it, or you could do both. One is you could do courses, either online courses or in-person workshops or that sort of thing. So not like qualification-based stuff, but actual hands-on training. Or you can get online, you can find videos and blogs and all sorts of things on here. The large majority of it is free. So you can start educating yourself in that way. Or you can do both. And in doing that, you can also get started and learn by experience. Going through traditional education, getting qualifications, that sort of thing, there will still be a lot to learn experience-wise afterwards. That's like anything you study for. Once you start working, you'll get more experience from that. So I'll quickly explain an example from my experience, and then I'll give you like the final answer. So 7 years ago now. Wow. Okay. About 7 years, or probably be coming up on 7 years. 7 years ago, I had my first runway show. Very first runway show I'd done. I hadn't done any runway training or anything before that. But as part of that, there was a couple of training sessions leading up to it. So that was good. The couple of days leading up to it, we had basically kind of like mini workshops where we actually went through the whole technique of actually doing a runway. Which again, with that misconception, a lot of people think, oh, it's easy, you just walk down a runway. Again, there's a technique to it. I mean, you can, but the top runway models are not just walking down a runway. There's a technique to how they hold themselves, how they walk, the expressions on their faces, which again, misconception. A lot of people from the outside of like fashion look at it and think, oh, they're all just like dead-faced. There's stuff going on there, technique-wise. But yeah, so we actually learned the technique of it and it was definitely good, actually, like learning that before I just jumped on a runway and tried to figure it all out on my own. So that's what I mean, why I mention this is, as much as you can just jump in the deep end, to have at least some kind of training, some kind of knowledge before you jump into it is always going to be an advantage. And at some point, you're going to have to learn it all. Qualification-wise, you don't need any qualifications to be a model. You can get qualifications in modeling. You don't need them. If you wanted to go to university or college and get qualifications, my best advice for that is choose a course, because, there's nothing wrong with getting the qualifications. If that's what you want, then go for it. But my best advice is investigate the courses you're considering a bit more and pick the one that is the most practical, as in it has the most practical work, where you're actually getting up and learning the techniques, not just sitting in a classroom listening to theory. Most things will still have that component, especially if you're going for some kind of degree. But pick the one that has the most hands-on experience. So that way you actually have that experience, you have that actual technique training, plus the qualification. Same thing with alternative education. Pick the right courses or the right places to learn from that involves the most technique, so you can actually practice and get experience from that. So some people, and I'll say for some people, I will say it's a minority of people, can jump straight in the deep end. And if that is you, if you know that is you, go for it. If that's going to be the best route, then go for it. But I can say that's going to be a minority of people. Most people, you want some kind of training. Whether it's going traditional education or alternative education, that one I'll actually say it is completely dependent upon you. But the advice for both of them is find the ones that are the most practical, as in they have the most practical work. That way you're actually getting not just knowledge, but actual skills and training that you can then step out of whatever that training is and step right into the modeling world. That pretty much sums it up. So actually that does sum it up. Those are my answers. So yes, it is one of those it depends on you answers, but that's my best advice. Whichever route you think you're thinking of taking, pick the one that's best for you, but make sure for anyone it's the most practical one.